listeners. Well, a very special episode we have with you this week. We've got a lovely guest right in front and centre, Carla Sargent. She's joining us at the helm today at Journey with Michael and Ryan, and we are very privileged to have her here. There's going to be lots of crossovers between our rebirthing breathwork facilitators training Ryan and I have done, and with her own healing birthwork trauma-informed practice, and all the things and all the juiciness, and we get to dive into that. So, Carla, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Super excited to have you here.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, so I was going over your Instagram little bio, and it says gives guidance to heal from birth trauma, and teaches the art and science of holistic birth trauma support. How awesome. I love that. It's a beautiful 3-sentence sum up. So would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you've come from, where you're going, and how you got here?
Yeah, right. So bit of a story, as there often is with these things. I knew from a young age that I wanted to work in birth, that I'd always felt quite a passion, a sort of stirring in my insides when I would see a pregnant woman or hear a story of birth or see little newborn babies. So from sort of my early teen years, I knew I wanted to become a midwife. This was kind of off the back of my own birth story that my mum birthing me, that I'd grown up hearing about. I was the third of three children, three daughters, and mum's births of my older two sisters we were all born in the 70s. She had really straightforward births with us all, but with the older two, she had the standard kind of interventions that were taking place back then, the routine enema and shave and episiotomy being cut, and babies being taken to the nursery after they were born and only brought to the mum for, breastfeeds every 3 hours or whatever. And this just didn't sit right with my mum. She felt quite traumatized really by some of these experiences, and she wanted things to be different. When she was pregnant with me, she wanted a different experience, and she had kind of heard about these home births that people in the States were having, and she got some books which she's now passed on to me, and they are like, oh my gosh, beautiful hippie home birth books with all these gorgeous images of empowered birthing in the home by the fire with the man holding his partner, and she has this look of like fear but sort of also ecstasy on her face, and it's like, wow, this looks amazing. So that imagery is what I kind of grew up with, and although mum had planned to birth me at home, which was quite a big feat for her, she actually had to get a midwife to agree to come down from Auckland to Hamilton, an hour and a half's drive, to attend my birth, and had to kind of garner the support of the doctors and Hamilton and all sorts. So she went on quite a journey during her pregnancy with me to set herself up for this sort of experience. Unfortunately, she couldn't get hold of the midwife when she went into labour with me. No cell phones back in those days, and I ended up having to be born in the hospital. But our family GP was the one who attended my birth, and he had been part of this kind of learning process. Mum had held a meeting at her home for anybody interested to hear about her plans to birth at home, and he attended that. So she had written a list of things that she got him to sign that he would agree to if she was to come and birth in the hospital with him. Amazing. Yeah, amazing, right? So none of the routine interventions, that she didn't want my umbilical cord to be clamped or cut until it had finished pulsating, which back then, the doctor said he'd never seen that in his life,
Isn't that crazy though? Because we've spoken about that often when we're speaking about breathwork and rebirthing, and it's like that's such an important part, to allow a baby to have its first breath is such a key moment,
Absolutely, right, and for that to be in their own time. And while there's that transition happening from the womb to the outside world, the cord is still providing the baby with lots of their blood and oxygen and nutrients and the goodies, that are in there. And we kind of, when we cut that cord straight away, we're not only denying them all of the goodness that's in the placenta and cord. I mean, up to a third of the baby's blood volume can still be in the placenta and cord at the time of birth. But also, like you are talking about here, we are forcing the baby to have to suddenly start breathing, right? And so that's not on their own terms, it's not on their own time. And the other important part of this is that once that cord is separated, mum and baby can be separated. And that's not what is supposed to happen at birth. Mum and baby are supposed to be, on each other, with each other. And that's a really sort of sacred and important and imprinting time for, the life of that, the relationship between that mother and child, the experiences perhaps of that baby as they come to feel safe or not in this new world. So anyway, she had that was one of the things she had requested, and she said she wanted to be able to take me home as soon as possible after the placenta was birthed. And indeed she did that sort of within half an hour of birthing me. She took me home to my sisters and tucked me up in bed with them, and that, and she actually got a letter of complaint from the hospital for that. Like, what
how dare she?
They took you out as quickly as possible. Well, back then, you're expected to stay in the hospital for sort of 5 nights or something.
So just a question on that. I think it is that seems so natural is so challenged, allowing a baby to come in its own time. Why is it that has been lost, or why is it that that's never really been part of it?
Yeah, there's a long story there. Unfortunately, the word patriarchy comes to mind, and control of women, of like a natural process to take it into the hands of medicine, where there's money to be made and power to be gained. And, if we stop women from realizing their power in birth, which is probably the key time in our lives where we can recognize just how freaking amazing our bodies are and our instincts and our intuition, and really kind of know how capable we are and how wise and, perfectly whole we are, and powerful. If we take that away from women, then she might never know that. And in fact, what I hear in my birth trauma support role is that women are coming out the other side of birth feeling the complete opposite to that. So medicine has taken away this priming of women to, this rite of passage from pre-motherhood into the mother role, where she intuitively, instinctively knows how to parent her baby in the way that they need her to parent them. They, know how to nurture, to respond to their baby's cues and needs, because they've just gone through this massive process of birth, this hugely challenging, and it's challenging physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, have gone through that, used all of her internal resources to overcome those massive challenges. And so she comes out the other side going, fuck yeah. Like,
I can do anything.
And also the baby has gone through its own rite of passage of actually coming through the canal. It's actually it's chosen life, and I reflect back onto my daughter's birth, and she's 9 now. So I was a different person than what I was now, and understanding education and things around all of this. And I remember there was no information outside of going through a hospital. Like I never would have even conceived there was a different option. It's just, you go to the hospital, you So my daughter's mum had preeclampsia. So she was 4 weeks. So Bella came 4 weeks early. They were trying to induce her. It just wasn't happening. All of a sudden, it just happened. And then my daughter Bella was born within 20 minutes. They were like, oh, yeah, we're going to get the epidural. And then she started to come and didn't get the epidural because she came within about 20 minutes, which is a blessing on its own. Like, I love it. My daughter didn't come out drugged out. Her mum was up walking around 20 minutes later. And then we went home the next day. But they were like, you know, I remember when Bella came, they gave me the cord straight away, bang, chopped it like shot up at me, the blood, like it was still pulsing, like, but no information. There was no extra information outside of that I would have ever thought to go, oh, look, that we should look at this, we should look at this. It's just so ingrained into us that, you know, men and women in white coats are, you know, I mean, even just birthing on your back. You know, like
it's not set up for the woman, is it?
It's not set up. So yeah, and then you go down this path now where, you know, our teachers, they call it too posh to push, you know, so they, you know, outside of an emergency cesarean, it's just, well, let's book it in because it fits in my schedule, you know. And so now the baby and the mother don't even get this rite of passage anymore to actually go through. And when we're rebirthing clients one-on-one, you can see the cesarean born babies outside of the babies that have actually chosen to go down the canal, and the differences in their personality and their reality of their life. And so, I mean, you can go into countries like South America where it's not even heard to have a normal, you know, a natural birth anymore. It's just, you just book it in, get a Caesar and get it done and get out and heal from that. So yeah, there's lots of, I love what you're talking about. And I think it needs to be shouted so much louder from every rooftop for this information, just to actually be more able to be absorbed. I know, like, even myself, I know even back then, if there was some information of going, hey, look, there's the reasoning why you should just let the cord just let it be for a while till it stops pulsing, I would have gone, hey, look, that makes sense. You know, I would have been connected to that information, you know, and just little things like that. And just from what we do now, from what I know now, from years of rebirthing, just how strong those experiences create your own life, right from the womb, from however you got birthed, from whatever happened straight away, whether you got put onto your mum, whether you didn't, whether there's abandonment created in there, all the things. I mean, that's 70% of your personality is created there. So I love what you're talking about, and and that's why, you know, sitting here with you today and having a great conversation about it, it lights us up, you know.
Yeah, it's beautiful talking to men about it, actually. You know, I'm used to talking to a lot of women about this, my work, and it's actually, it's really beautiful, having this kōrero with some guys.
Totally.
Yeah. And the important work you guys are doing with your rebirthing breath work about helping people to understand more of this stuff as well. I'd love to come back and get back to the original question about how I got into this work. You know, it's so easy to sort of trail off into these tangents.
Totally.
Which is
the art
awesome.
of the podcast is to bring it back to the original. You go off and then you come back, you know?
Yeah, hopefully by the end of this episode, I'll have actually gotten to the bit where I'm like, how I got into this network, you know?
I'm sure it'll unfold as we go.
Yeah, awesome. So I knew I wanted to be a midwife, and when I left school, that's what I did. I trained to be a midwife, and I did the direct entry midwifery program, so I didn't have to train to be a nurse beforehand. And I asked to be put with home birthing midwives as much as possible on my placements and that sort of thing, which was amazing. I did get to work with some incredible midwives, but what I very quickly, you know, I was quickly kind of brought back down to earth, if we want to put it that way, around my vision of birth, as I've described to you guys, was that birth was this beautiful, like powerful, special family occasion, right? Like, and what I was witnessing as a student midwife, which, you know, a lot of it is going into the hospitals and, you know, hospital births and that sort of thing, was, this doesn't look or feel like the sort of births that I was hearing about growing up or seeing in these books.
Well, you sort of what you know intuitively within you for it to be.
Yeah, exactly, right? I intuitively knew birth was designed to be this sort of experience, this beautiful experience. And it was like, this isn't feeling or looking anything like that. And I specifically remember one of my first real insights into the cruelty and traumatizing kind of experiences that are so normalized out there in our very over-medicalized birthing culture. And it was this first-time mum, had just given birth to her baby in the hospital. She'd had a really straightforward birth. She'd done an amazing job. She was like lit up holding her newborn, you know. It was a beautiful experience. But she had torn, and the midwife had called in the duty obstetrician to suture this tear. And I remember, you know, we went from this really beautiful kind of loved up space infused with all this oxytocin, this, you know, love drug that we are supplied with when physiological birth is supported to take place. From that to this man entering the room, not acknowledging what an amazing job this mum had just done and congratulations, none of that. He sort of gruffly introduced himself. I don't even remember if he did introduce himself. I just remember his presence being really cold and like, yeah, jarring against this, what had just happened, you know, this beautiful birth. And he sat himself between her legs at the end of the bed, and you know, she had her legs splayed so that he could suture her, and he was putting local anaesthetic into her, which was causing her a lot of pain, as it would, and instead of kind of waiting for that to work or checking her degree of numbness, he just started sort of putting this needle into her to suture her. And each time he did, she would kind of try and draw herself up the bed. And she was clearly in a lot of pain. And instead of being like, oh, you know, sorry, we need to, like, we'll wait a bit longer for the anaesthetic to work, or maybe we need a bit more anaesthetic. Instead of that, he slapped the inside of her thighs and said, relax, relax. How am I supposed to do this if you're going to keep tensing up like that?
Needed a kick
I
to the
was
face.
like, what am I witnessing here? What the F is going on? And the midwife wasn't saying anything, and the husband was sitting there holding his baby, not saying anything. And I'm just thinking, what's going on here? Like, you know, and I remember going back to midwife school and talking about it to my tutors, and they were like, yeah, well, if you want to support her to lay a complaint, you can do that, you know. And so when I next saw this mum, I said to her, hey, you know how that doctor sort of treated you with the suturing? If you want to like lay a complaint about that, I can support you to do that. And she said, oh, I just want to forget about it. You know, like she was in, as new mums are, she was in the overwhelm of new motherhood, like learning to breastfeed and dealing with the sleepless nights and all the hormonal ups and downs. Like, she didn't want to have to deal with going through a complaints process. Fair enough, you know. But what it ultimately meant was there were zero consequences for that guy. And he probably wasn't even aware that how he was treating her was not okay, because we normalized this like
malpractice.
Yeah, I don't know, this sort of sick kind of approach to managing births. And it's so disempowering and traumatizing for so many new families at a time when they are supposed to be, staying in this oxytocin love bubble, getting to bond and connect with their newborn, you know, like establishing breastfeeding, being loved on by a community, like a tribe of support. We don't have any of that in our Western culture.
Totally.
You know, we have no support for our new families. It's so messed up. It's so messed up.
And that can become really, really challenging, right? Because it's like if there's one story of that, there's probably going to be many, many more stories of that. And it's like we can both understand that just the mistreatment of patients in any aspect of Western medicine because of the speed, the rush, the disconnection that there is from, the ability that the body has to heal itself. It's like, for the journey that we've gone through, we know and understand that it's like the body is designed to do these processes. A lion doesn't need to go through labor and have another lion, have a baby for them or support them in that. They just know the process and they'll go through there in their own time. And we often forget that physiologically we are animals as well, right?
Yep.
If we give ourselves the time, the support, and the space to be able to go through that process, and it should be natural. Like, now it may not come without challenges, but it should be a natural experience, right? Something that does connect us to the child, to ourselves. I speak for ourselves as the cult, like the ether, not me having a baby as a collective, but more connected to ourselves, and even for the father, right, to be there in support of the mother, not to be pushed to the side and only allowed to come in at the end to snip the umbilical cord. It's like it takes the humanness out of the human experience.
Yeah.
So it would be really easy for us to like sort of drop down into what's wrong, but how about we go into like what's right? Like, what should a birth experience entail, and even the preparation of it? What does that entail for people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll definitely come back to that, because this has become a newer piece of what I'm doing is birth preparation work. Cool. I'm kind of getting a little bit not tired of doing the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff work, but just disheartened, just like, I want to be doing more fence building at the top, and so the birth preparation addition to the work I do has been quite beautiful in that regard. And I offer quite a different approach to birth and postpartum preparation than your standard antenatal courses, as you could probably guess. And it's all about unpacking Michael, you kind of talked about this a little earlier on, or alluded to it, but it's about unpacking the conditioned beliefs that we grow up with, that the men in white coats know better than we do what's best for our bodies, that we can't trust birth, that birth is inherently dangerous. So, of course, it should take place under medical guidance and in a hospital setting. That our bodies, we can't trust our bodies, that we are taught from a young age to tune out to our body messages. We're taught that intuition is a bunch of woo-woo nonsense, and the experts, and I'm using air quotes there, know better than we do what's best for us. And this is all, we are conditioned, primed to be compliant patients in the birth space, not to rock the boat, not to question the authority figures in our lives, not to take responsibility for our big decisions that affect us and our babies in birth and in parenting and in pregnancy. So it suits the system beautifully that we grow up with so much fear around birth and around our bodies and our capabilities, and we are led to believe that if we don't do as the medical authorities advise, then we are being irresponsible. So we are blindly being led down a path that does not serve us or our babies or our families, and we're walking into the lion's den when we dive into the system as pregnant.
It's interesting. Something just dropped in while you were talking. That anyone who's in the space of birth working, rebirthing, anything to do with that concept, we're considered rebels, right? We're considered going against the grain. Like our teachers our rebirthing teachers all the time, like, we're the rebels. And it's really interesting to think that we're all here trying to we're at the other end, right? We're at the bottom of the hill. helping the ambulance, because they've gone through their life with all this birth trauma, and now that it's coming out in ways where they need to release it or move through it or whatever it is. They're sick of that programming, right? Whereas you're starting at the other end. You're like, oh, cool, I want to now catch this and nip this in the bud, right? But even still on the same concept, we're still all rebels, right? We're still here trying to help people naturally heal themselves through their own tools, empower them to give their own power back, to pull their power away from patriarchy, matriarchy, whatever the archy is, right? It's just like, we're just trying to empower people to like make the choice, own your own choices, and if you do want to go down the hospital route because that's where you feel safest, just like own that as well, just do it with the most informed way as possible, gather, here's what to look for, you want to do a home birth, great, that's amazing, there's not one better than the other, but if you're doing something out of lack of information and education and fear, because of how, as you said, it's like, oh, these people know better about my body. Oh, yeah, I'll let them induce me because they say that this is going to happen, instead of allowing the body to move through. Now, we're not talking about emergency situations. We have a beautiful, Western medical field that has uplifted the death rate because of the exact circumstances like this. Childbirth rate, death has gone far below where it was in the dark ages, and that's obviously what the status says. We are living longer now is because there's actually less childbirth death. So the average is higher.
Yeah.
So, that there itself is just like, well, look at what we've done, But I when you were talking, I had this image of like these Viking tribes, and just they would all gather and they would all allow the birth to happen, and then the father would be involved, and there would be, the birth workers of the village would actually come in, and it would be a day, 2-day, 3-day process for whatever happened. They would sing, they would chant, they would bless the house, and so where you're taking this back to, and we've got another friend of ours, Rosie, who's very involved in all of the birth working places and things as well. She's amazing. And speaks exactly the same language as you. And
she trained with me.
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I love Rosie. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And so like it's very cool just to see what you're trying to do, and just again being the rebel, but just with no fucks given, right? Being like, no, I'm here to help people, and that's it. I'm sure you get pulled down left, right, and center from the mainstream medical and trying to discredit you and all that sort of stuff. But this is why these platforms are so important for us to speak about these things and bring you on and be like, yo, this is what we're doing, and send it out to the world.
This is actually the options you have, right? Because a lot of people don't know. A lot of people aren't informed that this is actually a possibility, that they're actually allowed to question what's being laid in front of them, So even if that gets to the ears of just a few people, I mean, that's a beautiful message, a beautiful thing to convey.
100%. Yeah. Medicine it does some amazing things, and absolutely there are some people's pregnancies and births that require medical interference in order to have safe outcomes. The reality is, though, that we are advising so many women, so many couples, that in order to have safe outcomes, you need to have this induction of labour, you need to have the cesarean, you need to have, this intervention, that intervention, these scans, this, that, the other thing. We now have a 31% cesarean section rate, higher for first-time mums. I think it's 34% for first-time mums here in New Zealand, where we actually have a much better maternity care system than most other parts of the world. That's almost a third it's more than a third of first-time mums giving birth to their babies by way of, this major surgical procedure. And induction of labour rates are fairly similar too. Medical induction occurs in around 1 in 3 births in New Zealand. So, and I'm hearing the fallout from those sorts of interventions. And so these intervention rates continue to climb and climb and climb. But you know what happens to the rates of baby loss, baby death? Stay plateaued, like staying the same. They are not, they're not saving more lives by doing more more of these major interventions, and these interventions that are done in the name of safety that women are pushed, bullied, coerced, pressured into having, with, like you've talked about, little in the way of information about their options and about the risks and benefits. These interventions that have been done in the name of safety are actually causing a lot of needless harm, physical harm, but also other sorts of harm that, you guys discover in your work, right? We know with rebirthing, like how we are born and how we give birth matter greatly. And
to both the mother and the child.
Absolutely.
Such a huge impact, because if we're not allowed to go through that experience, we've never experienced our choosing life, choosing when to come, and that translates to so many of the challenges that people can have, and same with a mother. It's like, how do you know that the baby has truly passed if it hasn't actually come through the canal, through the portal into this world? There's always going to be this subtle disconnection if the baby isn't placed on our heart straight away and it's taken straight into another room. There's always going to be a disconnect and a longing.
Yeah, and it's not just cesarean birth, like there are vaginal births that are really traumatizing experiences as well, and where there's a sort of needless trauma taking place, but yes. Yeah.
So with the work that you do, with the birth work and the healing trauma work, what is it that you're doing with patients or clients afterwards? So they've had this birth experience. They've obviously come to you for a reason, because they feel like something's a little off, or there is some trauma there, something that they need to shift through. Like, what do you normally see with clients, and how are you sort of supporting them through that?
Yeah. So probably the most common impacts I hear about in my work for people who have experienced traumatic birth, which I just want to say beforehand that a lot of people are not even aware that what they experienced is, appropriately called trauma, because we have normalized so much of this over-medicalization and essentially birth being a disempowering and, traumatizing experience. And so people don't think what I went through wasn't okay, and, it was traumatic, and I therefore deserve and need some support to help find healing. Instead, they are being fed this from society as well, this notion of just be grateful, be thankful, at least you've got a healthy baby. Suppress those other emotions in favor of this toxic positivity of,
it's a representation of humanity as a whole, realistically, right? Oh, just avoid the trauma. Don't look at it. Don't worry about it. As is life, go on, when are you going to get back to work? When are you going to put your child in early childhood centre and get back to work? You've got a role to play here.
Yeah, be grateful. It could have been worse. At least, Anything that begins with at least is kind of unhelpful for somebody who been through trauma. When they do make their way to me, and often their trauma doesn't look anything particularly obvious, right? Like, this... I think for a long time, people thought that in order to say you've had a traumatic birth, you would have had to have had like a baby loss experience, or perhaps a premature birth where baby had to spend time in NICU, or I don't know, some major blood loss that meant that you had a near-death experience, or something like really obvious like that. No, most people who experience birth as traumatic that are coming to me, at least, their birth trauma is not nearly as obvious as that, and it's all based around disempowerment. So a lot of the time it's about not having access to, like we talked about earlier, the information and support they needed in order to make the decisions that they felt were safest, best for them. Being pressured, bullied, coerced into having procedures that they didn't feel comfortable with, being done to by people who, like the experience that I described of the new mum being sutured, obstetric violence is a thing, and a lot of people would refer to their experience as obstetric rape, that they are being violated in ways, and when they say no or stop or aren't given the opportunity to give or refuse consent, that is, that is an abuse, that is a violent act. And, a lot of the women who are birthing their babies, isn't it like 1 in 3 have experienced past sexual trauma or abuse as well. So that's going to be triggered. There's just so much that kind of comes into the picture. So, so when I work with somebody, it's about, usually they're carrying a narrative that says something like, it was just as well that the experts were there to rescue my baby from my faulty body. I ought to be grateful that they and I'm all about changing that narrative and helping them to understand, because they hold so much guilt and shame and anxiety. Those are probably the 3 key words I would use, and self-doubt for, to describe the fallout from a traumatic birth experience: self-doubt, guilt, shame, and anxiety.
Is there like an aspect of failure as well?
Absolutely. Yes. And failure. Yeah. A sense of that they failed. Yeah. I failed at birth. I failed to bond with my baby, and I failed to breastfeed. Struggling to bond with their baby and struggling to breastfeed or being unable to are common responses to a traumatic birth experience. So how do I begin to work with these women? Well, firstly, I have them share their story, and that sometimes takes 20 minutes and that sometimes takes 2 hours. Share your story from your perspective, no holds barred. I'm here to validate your experience, and you are not going to hear anything close to the words that you probably heard each time you try and share your story. Just be grateful. Focus on the positives. And that is a really, really important first step, is actually being heard and seen in their experience, and getting to share what's been on their heart. And then I help to unpack their story with my understandings of the things we talked about earlier around the conditioned fear, birthing physiology and what interferes with our ability to birth our babies the way we're designed to. So fear does interfere with that. How the impacts of various interventions, or the degree of support or lack thereof that they had, how these things impacted their experience, so that they learn that their body didn't fail them, their body was trying to protect them. Failure to progress in labour, that lack of oxytocin, is because they were scared, is because their body believed that it was not a safe space in which to give birth to a helpless infant. So it's a protective mechanism when our labour stalls or stops, right? It's a survival mechanism. And instead, women are believing that their body is letting them down. I failed to progress. And that's what's written in their notes. Failure to progress. Cesarean section for failure to progress.
Yeah. And then that probably translates to many other aspects of their life, right? The failure to progress. How do we move on from this if we couldn't move on from that experience?
Yeah. Well, it certainly impacts their parenting journey, but also any future births. If they don't have the opportunity to unpack their story in the way that we do it, where they learn about the physiology and how it was these other things that impacted their experience. With that new information, they have a new vision for themselves in terms of any future births, and they will, like a lot of the people who I work with around healing their traumatic first births, go on to planning their next birth at home or with a different care provider, or it's a whole different story. And this is what, like, I have my own podcast, Healing Birth with Carla, which is stories of people who have done that, who have experienced birth trauma and then gone on to find what they needed to have a really healing, positive, empowering next birth experience. So we unpack their story, help them to view things through a different lens, a much more empowering one where they can hold compassion for themselves. I mean, every mother, nobody wants a safe outcome for herself and her baby more so than the person herself, right? Like, that seems obvious. So I remind them that whatever choices they made around their pregnancy and birth care were made in the belief that that was going to bring them the safest outcome. And you don't know what you don't know. So if you're not, if you haven't had your conditioning pointed out to you, if you're unaware of your people-pleasing tendencies, your inability to say no, stop, or I want more information before agreeing to that. If you're not aware of those things and you don't understand the physiology and the impacts of the interventions and that, then you're going to say yes to the expert who's telling you need this, that, and the other thing, or you are going to put all your trust into them rather than into yourself. And
well, that's, I mean, how we do one thing's how we do everything, right? And you can look at this as someone who's willing to look at their birth is willing to look at themselves, right? They're willing to grow in their life. If I have another child, it would be a completely different scenario from when I had my first one 9 years ago. And I'm sure, Ryan, when you start having bubbas, it's going to be a completely non-medical approach. But what I find interesting is when I first started on my rebirthing process, one of the first month or two, you're literally asking your parents questions about your own birth. I mean, that's just not something that I had ever thought about conceivingly being like, oh yeah, let's just talk about my own birth. And from that conversation, there's so much to unpack. If you just understand and start asking questions about your own birth. For me, it actually connected me more to my parents, because I was like, actually, hey, look, what was that about? And I understood them a little bit better, because when I asked my dad, he's like, oh, I don't really know. So I'm like, oh, how disconnected were you at that time? And then my mum's like, oh, it was this and that and this and that. And I'm like, oh, I totally understand. So even just in that, right, even just starting to unpack your birth story from your own child, or your own birth story with your parents, that can set you on such a different tangent to start to see the world in a different way, because it's the most traumatic thing we will go through. Our head literally becomes a cone when you come down, because it's soft. It's, when we're rebirthing people, you push on their head and it just triggers them, because they're holding all this birth trauma just all in their skull and various parts of the body. And but it's traumatic for a reason, right? Like, to go through trauma, you're going to come out the other side of it, and that's where your growth happens. So, even for people listening to this, who have had their first kid, or maybe first two kids and one and a third or whatever, and you think, oh geez, I haven't actually started to look at that. Well, that in itself is your journey to be able to start looking at yourself, like that trauma yourself. As you said, you're always going to make the best decisions with the information and level that you're at that time. You're not going to make a bad decision for yourself. You're going, well, I'm empowering these people because they say they're the best at what they do, and that's my belief system of what they do. So coming into it and going, oh, my second baby's going to be different, or third, or whatever it is, it's like, it's not shaming the first one, because you only knew what you knew at that time, and you're not going to make a bad decision for yourself. So yeah, it's certainly a really interesting process, and you must have such beautiful stories from amazing people who, might have gone through the first one, and then now they've got second and third, and you'll see the personalities and the children be completely, not completely different, but they'll be different. They'll be slighted because of the way that they got birthed, right?
Yeah. I like to believe, and I don't know how much truth there is in this or evidence, but I like to believe that as, the mother and sometimes the dad, sometimes I get to work with dads too, go on this healing journey themselves, that the child whose birth had been a traumatic birth experiences their own healing through the healing of their parents. And I actually am the last piece of the work I do after, the unpacking their story and is offering a bunch of tools for some like where to from here once you like leave this call with me. How can you continue to process and heal? And a lot of those are writing tools. There's all sorts, but some of them are writing tools. And one of them is I suggest that they write a letter to their baby. And in the letter, they express to them what their hopes had been for their birth and start to life, their grief at how things unfolded, and then their vision and hopes for their relationship with this child looking forwards from here. And inevitably, as they are writing this letter, it brings up a lot of the grief. And I say, let it come, like stop writing for a bit and have a good cry. Birth trauma is a loss experience, and like any loss experience, there is going to be a grief process you need to go through. And let's stop suppressing that, like you've been encouraged to do from the get-go. Let's let those emotions move through you. So, and then I suggest that if it feels okay for them to read the letter to their baby or their child, and they're not going to understand a word of what's written. And it's not about the words; it's about the letting their child into their expression of this emotion, letting this energetic exchange that's taking place between a mother and child as she shares her love and loss story with her baby. I really believe that enables the baby's own healing because we have this thing in our culture, right? Like in Western culture of separating ourselves from our children when we are experiencing difficult emotions. We go to our room or wait till they're not around to have that big cry or that release of whatever sort it looks like, or to have difficult conversations with our partner, the like rupture and repair stuff, that all takes place behind closed doors. We need to be modeling, healthy emotional expression to our children and how to, communicate and express ourselves in other ways as well. And so I sort of see this as multi-purpose on that sort of front, this like process of writing the letter and then sharing it with the baby. But I don't know. I don't know how much.
I trust there's a lot of power in that. There's a huge amount of power in that for the mother and for the child, whether they read it to them or not, right? Like energetically to sort of rewrite that script of what the desire was, what happened, and what's to be. Like there's so much power in that because sometimes the child can feel disconnected, from the work that we do with clients and understanding their birth. It's like, well, why did my parents choose for that to happen to me? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why is it that I wasn't placed on my mum's chest? Why is it that I have this disconnection? And it can sort of answer a lot of questions because you're actually seeing the experience of birth, not through what your body can remember, but through what actually happened in your mother's own experience. And that in itself is incredibly powerful, incredibly healing, because you're going to get to see, oh, wait, it wasn't her choice for there to be a disconnection. That was actually someone else's choice. So I can actually forgive her for that. I can process that. I can release that. I can let that go. I don't have to hold my mother at a distance because she didn't want me. It's just like, no, I can allow her in.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. This has come up here. So I went and sat in a plant medicine journey at Oscar a couple of weekends ago, and my daughter lives in Perth, in Australia, with her mum. And I left Perth when she was 2, and so I've gone back and visited her. But there's a long disconnect now, and there's things I've got to work through with her mum. But so when I was over there when she was 6, I actually rebirthed her. And just laid her down and just got her into some breath, and her little tears started coming, and I just started, sharing, hey, look, I'm sorry. I know you were going to feel abandoned from me, and just like she doesn't understand what I was saying, but it's in her system, as she was breathing and the emotions were flowing. And it's interesting because there was no pushback. There was just, oh, I'm going to breathe, and then the tears come, and then she was like, are we done now after like 20 minutes? And just kind of like bounced back into it, like the beauty of a child just not trying to work things out, was just in it and allowed it. And so when I was in the Aya ceremony a couple of weekends ago, I'm really coming up with things of how can I build the love and energy for my daughter. And So what I'm going to do is actually create an email account, and I'm going to just write to her, once a month, once a week, whenever it comes. And I'm going to tell her her birth story in this writing. I'm going to tell her who I am, who she is, from send her pictures of my life. So it's eventually at the point where she's able to make her own choice and be able to be in my life. Then she has all this beauty of reading, and she's going to be able to go back to the first thing, and I'll tell her about her birth and all this stuff, because I understand how important it is now. Like, it really is important. It really gives you, I can see, in our white Western culture, I've always seen, First Nations and different things like that, like wanting to come back and understand where they come from, their tribe. And so this, I think, for me, has just given me, like, once you understand your birth, you understand a bit more about your conception. It's your big bang. It's how you came out into this world. And so you can actually get a little bit more grounding in who you are. You get a bit more love or connection between your mother and your father, or however it comes forward. But I definitely think understanding your own birth story and sharing that with your children, I think, is very important. I don't think you can do it too early either. I think, the earlier that they understand it, then get into it. Because as you say, they might not understand it all, but the energetics that, and the deep resonance that's in everybody's nervous system from your birth will be awoken. The genomes will be switched on, those epigenetics. And from there, just let them roam free with no shoes on out in the park.
What a gift, Mike. Yeah, just want to reflect that. Like, do not underestimate just how powerfully impactful that loving expression, that commitment to serving your daughter in those ways is, and is going to continue to be throughout her life.
Yeah, so when she's like 15, 16, when she can actually, get out of the under the grasp of her mother, then I'll just give her the code, and she can just log in, and she'll have all these years of emails, because she'll think that I haven't been there, and the stories and all that, that horrible, like, co-parenting nastiness from that happens in there, in most people. But all of a sudden one day she'll be able to just read all these beautiful things. So yeah. There was a nice little download that came with that, and it segues nicely into what you're saying about sharing birth stories with our kids. So
yeah, I don't suppose there's any stories you guys want to share of, like, I although I've trained in rebirthing breathwork under somebody different to you guys, we never actually did any rebirthing, so to speak, taken back to our own birth experiences under the breath, or I've never done that with somebody else. So I'm intrigued to hear what comes up for people, or how, do people re-experience their births, or and what kind of lessons do they take from that experience? Like, is there any that sort of stand out that you'd be open to sort of sharing?
Man, we've got so many. Most clients that we guide through it, at some point, if they're into the journey for long enough, we can get to that experience of re-experiencing birth. That can happen the first time. It could happen the 10th time. You don't really know. Sometimes you can set the theme for it by going through the conception process. Even we have women that actually re-experience the birth of their child. Like, we had a woman who just went limp, and both me and Mike, we were in the room together guiding everyone through a group session, and you can see, like, this is the moment when she got the epidural, and she just totally numbed out, and her breath was just faint, and it was very thin. And then as she processed that and as it flushed out, you could see the life coming back to her. So it's like all of these different aspects and all of these different experiences are possible throughout the breath and things that we have experienced. There's so many connections to it.
Yeah, and there's always so you've got a branch, right? And off that branch, you've got other branches. So you might, hit a bunch of branches there, but then you come back, and then slowly you start coming back to core wounds, core traumas, and then if you keep going into it far enough, you're going to start hitting your birth traumas. You're going to start hitting the ancestral trauma that comes through. In one of my rebirths, I've re-experienced my birth as my mother, like, so I became my mother birthing me, because obviously I would be wearing her trauma from the breath, from her own birth, because it is passed through. It's there. It's a conjoined process. So I moved that through, and we've been doing this for years now, and we're going to open up our own school next year. So we've got 2 more months to go with our facilitator training under our teachers again after the second 12-month lot. So we will be training rebirthers and taking them through the 9-month journey. And I mean,
makes sense that it's 9 months, right?
Yeah, 9 months is the inception, right? Yeah. I mean, even I've been working with this. I mean, both Ryan and I have worked with this amazing woman, and so she's had brain tumors in her head, and she's been working with us for probably about 3 years now, in various different forms, and so she comes back and gets rebirthed, and it was about 6 months ago that we finally really hit the absolute abandonment birth trauma that really, because she was adopted out, and without going too much into her story, there was a huge, massive abandonment there that just totally, the ego self just goes, no, I'm gonna disassociate from that, and that became her core wound, and so that becomes dis-ease within the body, and that obviously then grew into her brain tumor. And what's really beautiful was about 2 months ago, she sent me a photo of then and now, and how much decreased it actually has, and it's almost gone. But so that's the power of actually going back into your own birth trauma, because these deep shadow aspects of self, of deep wounding, abandonment, whatever it is, if they're not felt, then they will just masticize. They will keep creating dis-ease within the body, and eventually be our disease from there. And so this is the power of actual rebirthing and going deep into these birth trauma. They're not just birth traumas. I mean, you go through a whole life trauma, but the birth traumas are the ones that are held deep within the psyche, deep within the subconscious, and it only comes down to your own willingness to go and feel them, because they're so powerful. They are so powerful. And we've seen like literally miracles happening. And we've got so many stories. We had a dear friend of ours, his father was not far from his life ending from cancer, and he finally came in and had a rebirth with us. But the concept of his is he felt the hand of God on him during the rebirth, and that actually helped him just accept life for the next 4 months and be as present as he's ever been, and finally allowed himself to pass away in state of that. And so again, back to the birth trauma, back to and his one was actually like leaving the lands that he had to leave and things like that. So it's so incredibly powerful, and that's just in the breath aspect, and with the rebirthing itself, what it is there's actually different concepts you go through. Like Ryan mentioned, there's a conception process, there's a mother-father wound that you can start going through, there's the personal law, there's all these other aspects, and once you actually start delving into them, they're just opening up different facets of self, and you're like, oh, I need to look at that, and it's just radical truth and radical authenticity starts to flow from it, if you're willing to look, and if you're willing to feel, and that's why we are who we are, like it just is. And we can sit here and talk about birthing with the best of you, even though we're men,
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I'm intrigued from your guys' perspective. Is every experience of being born a traumatic one? It's just a matter of degree, or yeah?
Yeah, I'd say so, yes. Like, because it is one of those big things, right? Like it's the initiation into the world. And as you can say, well, it would actually be interesting. I don't think I've actually ever rebirthed someone who had a home birth that was an extremely successful one. So it'd be really interesting to guide someone through that journey and really just see, what was birth like for you? How was that experience? And you'd probably find that, you'd probably find that the experience for them would probably be easy. They may just allow themselves to go through the process instead of the resistance, the fight, the fear, the locking, the tension, that all of that comes up for most people because of the experience that they were more than likely forced through, or 1 in 3 people having a cesarean section, you know. So that would be a really interesting thing to explore, and maybe we can set that up together. I'm sure you have clients that have had home births or know people that do, and we could, you know, see what the experience is like. It would be really, really interesting.
Because there's the evolution. I was going to say there's the evolution of rebirthing as well on the dry, and then we do it in the spa pool. So you get a snorkel and a nose clip on, and we'll put the client in the water for an hour. So it's at 37 degrees, so it's about blood temperature, right? And so they do the full rebirth, the breath work under the water while we're there holding them. And so we get a lot more going back to the womb stuff when you're in there, because you're signifying being back in the womb from there. So, you know, that would even be a beautiful process. But just before you continue, I had a little laughing thought when you asked us that question: is everyone's birth traumatic? Well, they wouldn't come and see us if they didn't, I guess. So that made me laugh. So, you know, if you had a good birth, why would you, you know, necessarily maybe come and do rebirthing? Who knows?
Yeah, I like intrigue, I guess. I just want to say, Ryan, you said, you know, like you haven't done it with anybody who's had a home birth. I just want to say you don't have to be born at home or birth at home in order to have a really positive, empowering, beautiful, respectful, loving experience, you know. And I do believe that my own birth, my mum's birth of me, was such an experience. You know, she had wanted to birth me at home. That couldn't happen, but I was born in the hospital in a very kind of respectful, loving, supportive sort of way. And yeah, and I do wonder if, like, my sisters, you know, like I said, they had straightforward births, but there were these traumas of, like, for my mum at least, of you know, these routine interventions, but then the separation, you know, taking the babies down to the nursery and that sort of thing, like that would definitely have been traumatizing for the baby, and the cutting of the cord early and that sort of thing. And they had traumatic birth experiences themselves, giving like my sisters did, giving birth to their babies. I've given birth 3 times now, and I loved giving birth every time. I, you know, birthed my 3 at home in the birth pool, surrounded by 9 or 10, you know, loved ones, family members, beautiful midwives, and it was like, I loved giving birth. I like pine that I'm like not going to get to do that again, you know. And it's just such the opposite sort of story to what you hear most people say, or, you know, they sort of see birth as a means to an end, just something you've got to endure and get through to come out the other side. And so a couple of things. One is, I'd love to be rebirthed. Like, let's see if I've had this positive, you know,
come on over.
What comes through. Yeah, I have to come and get into the spa. That'd be amazing.
I'm sure we can arrange that, definitely.
That would be awesome.
Totally.
And what else was I going to say on that front? Might have gone. Yeah, it'll maybe come back, but.
Whoosh.
That's cool.
Beautiful. Yeah.
All right, well, we should probably look at sort of come into a close with this beautiful conversation. So, Carla, like for you, what are the sort of last points that you want to share with people that are sort of going through the childbirth experience, or may feel that they have something within them that they're wanting to move through?
If you have had a birth experience that you're listening to this and you're going, actually, yeah, my birth was traumatic, that to know that your trauma is valid, right? You deserve to be heard, you deserve healing, and that's available to you, that it doesn't matter how long ago you gave birth, that there is always healing to be had, and to value, to honor that, because your healing is not just profoundly impactful for you and the rest of your days and your vision of who you are in this world and, you know, how you can be in this world, but it has flow-on effects, ripple effects to your children, to their experiences of birth, to the stories that you go on to tell others. So too, it's hugely important. Like I said earlier, how we give birth and how we are born matters deeply. We are designed to be born into love and to experience birth in a loving kind of way, and yeah, if that wasn't your experience, then yeah, seek out some healing. It's available, it's there. Contact these guys or get in touch with me.
Well, how do people find you?
Yeah. So my business is called Healing Birth. I'm on Instagram, healing.birth, or Facebook, Healing Birth with Carla with a C. You can listen to my podcast, Healing Birth with Carla. I'm on Instagram, Healing Birth. Website, healingbirth.co.nz. So there's lots of ways you can get in touch with me or learn. Yeah.
We'll put it all in the show notes as well, all the links to find you. And we'll sing this one from the loudest from the rooftops. So, Carla, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you. I feel like I've learned so much just from your beautiful self in the last hour. So thank you for sharing so openly and vulnerably. And we'll definitely get you up for that rebirth.
Gorgeous. Thank you. I've loved it.
No, it has been a pleasure. And I think after that rebirth, we may have to have another a podcast just to talk about your experience and just to see if it is possible, if truth does lie in the feeling we have.
Nice. We're getting into experiment territory here. I love it. Yeah. Beautiful. Hey, beautiful team. Thank you guys so much for listening this week. We will be here, same bat time, same bat channel next Thursday. And until then, have a beautiful week. We will see you then. Shoo.